Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, I'm out and about today, sitting in a coffee shop quite close to home. Now, I'm going to describe it now, just so you can understand more about exactly where I am. Well, the first thing I can tell you is it's one of these coffee shops which is American and very informal. So we have chairs and seats, but they're not all around separate tables. They seem to be in no particular order. So it's one of these places where you could pull a chair from anywhere and sit on it without a table if the place gets really, really busy. Now, not a lot of thought has gone into the positioning of the tables and chairs. So sitting directly across from me, there's three other people. I'm sitting with my back to the window. The place is very transparent, and the people who are sitting across from me are not at the same table. There are a few tables back, but yet we have direct eye contact and views of each other. Behind them is the counter where people are ordering coffee. Now, I suppose the strange thing about this particular coffee shop is all of the baristas are wearing headsets, and they're clearly having conversations which are nothing to do with customers. I can hear them laughing, so I don't know whether they're talking to each other or talking to maybe the boss, or I don't quite know, to be honest. This type of coffee shop is referred to as a drive-in because cars can drive around, order at one window, and pick up their coffee at the next. Now that sounds beautiful, doesn't it? But I'm not quite sure how that works here, because looking outside these huge transparent windows, I can see there's a storm, it's pouring, and there's cars whizzing around. So it's perhaps not the kind of drive-in that you see in the movies. There are a few more secluded spots here. There's a few little alcoves where people are sitting with computers. Clearly they're hoping to find a more quiet area where they might be contented to work online. Now I can see that most people here have phone in hand or else have iPads. And some of them are studying, some of them are scrolling, but yet the atmosphere would be not really conducive for students because it's very noisy. There's music playing, and there's also people having very loud conversations. I have heard that it's quite fashionable now for programmers just to go to a coffee shop and stay there, particularly if the Wi-Fi is good. But I can't imagine people doing that here. Let me continue describing what I'm seeing. So, although this is like a glass house with glass everywhere, there are little alcoves where there's solid walls. The designs are rather abstract, but bright in color. And there's electricity sockets everywhere so that people can charge their phones and generally have a connection to their devices. The only people who are really talking to each other are in fact the baristas. I think they're probably making more noise than anybody else. Along the counter they have the Italian-style coffee machines, but the people serving are certainly very, very British. Looking over at the boards behind them, so behind the counter there's large boards advertising Christmas drinks, Christmas-style coffees, And as you would expect in a coffee shop, lots and lots of sugar. The roof is very bare and looks like it's just been set up. There's beams and rafters. It's not painted. It's been left to look rather, well, bare. So it's not covered. Looking up, there's a lot of metal, and attached to the metal there are spotlights, air conditioning, speakers for music to flow, and of course the smoke alarms. But it's strange because the place looks very professional on one hand, but once you look up, you can see how bare the place actually is. All around the border of this place, internally I mean, in the interior, there's spotlights everywhere. So these metal beams have metal strips attached to them, and the lights are all pointing downwards. Of course, like any UK place, there's a really huge fire exit, and the sign is very clear: please only use in the event of an emergency. And there's bathrooms here for every conceivable type of person, for people who define themselves in every conceivable kind of way. Men, women, other, and of course one for disabled people as well. Behind me there's a little row of shops, but it's clear this is some kind of industrial park. You'd really have to drive here because there isn't really room for anyone to walk. It's like one big concrete park, and the only pavements are in front of the shops that are behind me. The feel here is certainly very American, and it's an American chain of coffee shop here, so that's probably why. The baristas seem very interested in everything that their colleagues are doing, but there's not a lot of interest really in the customers. Behind them I can see there's a window open where they are serving cars which are whizzing round, and the highlight on the counter are the different bottles of syrup. So I've described what you see inside this coffee shop. Now let me just begin to describe the feeling that I have. Well, the first feeling I have is it's big, okay? But I don't think it's the best use of space. There's a lot of empty spaces here with simply nothing in them. So I could describe it as being a little bit barren. Certainly there's lots of conversations taking place here, so I could describe it as being busy. I could describe it as being quite warm in some ways, particularly with the people, but outside of these small clusters of conversation, it has some kind of feeling that if they switched off the music, this place might actually just be reduced to a library. That is, if the baristas would shut up long enough. Because the bulk of the people here are on devices. The overall feeling of the place, I think I would have to describe it, as I've said a moment ago, as barren, with wasteful spaces. I could describe it as being bright because of the transparency of the windows, but I feel like I'm on display. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I would guess that people whizzing around here and waiting for a coffee might be eyeing up who's inside, perhaps for potential dates, or as a way of deciding whether they're going to enter. Other descriptions I could say, well, certainly it has very bright digital billboards which give a real feeling of modernity. But something's certainly being lost because, like most places here, where there's such a focus on technology, there's less focus on people socializing. And even those who are sitting next to each other, they're not talking, they're just playing on their laptops or texting their friends, which makes me wonder why they're actually meeting. Of course, it could be colleagues who are studying together. We all like to have study partners. Looking down at the floor, I'm reminded of how much I don't think this place is actually warm. Because looking at the floor, which is large grey tiles, I might as well be sitting in the lobby of a very cold office, be in a prison, or even in the bathroom, because there's no carpet and there's no sense of anything on the floor except these cold tiles. I suppose it makes it convenient for brushing, but clearly comfort is not something that they do well here. The seats are comfortable, but yeah, there's something quite missing. I think if perhaps they had some real flowers, I mean ones which were coming into bloom, or even some color on the tables, it might be a little bit better. But there's none of that here. They're simply plain brown tables, plain brown seats with a little bit of leather on them, and there's one bar which has tea and coffee on it, as well as the stirrers to stir your tea and coffee. So, just to recap then, wasteful, barren, a little bit social, but with this floor, the only other word I think I can use to describe the atmosphere is intensely practical. It's kind of like an IKEA, if you remember what the inside of those shops look like. There's too much space, too little people. It's good, I think, in some ways if you're bringing in, for example, children, because they can run around. But then again, who would want that? I think overall coffee shops like this attract people for practical purposes, where they can just come in, have a conversation, spend time studying and leaving. It's certainly not designed for comfort, even though the seats are comfortable. Well, there we are. Now, if there is anything regarding history or practicality here, it would only be the plaque on the wall, which talks about the history of the coffee chain. But there's nothing else here which speaks of history. It's a modern building, prefabricated, with a very plain roof, which hasn't even been varnished or painted. This is one key difference between American places and British places. You know, American places, they're often very modern because, of course, there aren't so many old buildings in America as here. But that's creeping in here too. I think people here now favor new buildings because the older ones are too large for places like coffee shops. Just to finish, just to describe the people who are here, on such a wet day, you would imagine there would be wet umbrellas everywhere, but actually not. Some people here are wearing shorts, but that might be because there's a gym just next door, or it may be that they've simply stepped out of their cars to come here. Well, I've described the coffee shop. I hope you found this helpful, and let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.